And oftentimes, 4-Hour Workweek readers will say, "Well, that's not true." But it's actually I'm talking about it in the context of travel,
Right.
and I think a lot of travel metaphors can be applied to home or business life. The way I use it specifically in Vagabonding is just the idea that all too often people will micromanage their travels and their travel plans, which is actually kind of fun. It's fun to travel things, but no matter what research you do in advance, that willingness to improvise and deviate from your plans really counts for more than all the plans you did. So I don't discourage anybody from planning, but oftentimes I use the bucket list as a metaphor sometimes. That you create a bucket list that seems awesome, but then after a week, you're seeing things that are way cooler than anything you would have known to put on your bucket list. Basically, what I'm saying is that after a week of travel, you know more about the place where you're traveling than you would sitting in front of your computer at home dreaming about that place. So if you're not willing to improvise, then you might be selling it short. And so I think that can apply to business settings as well, because regardless of how you plan for a given scenario in business, if you're not willing to improvise and deviate from that plan to accommodate surprises and serendipity, then you might be selling them that short. He actually didn't contact me directly before he traveled. When he contacted me, it was before the book came out. So, yeah, maybe, the book and its resources gives quite a bit of advice. Yeah, so hopefully he and most readers will get that philosophical push that they need. But what he contacted me for specifically before the 4-Hour Workweek came out was just general advice. And I'm sure I was one of maybe dozens of people that he contacted before the book came out, which was smart because he just wanted perspectives because it was his first book. It's funny, he specifically, one of the things he was curious about was recommendations for agent, and I happily referred him to my agent at the time, who told him no. So my agent, who's no longer it's been a while since she's been my agent, but for whatever reason, she turned down the 4-Hour Workweek. I think she was one of many who did. Whether or not she even remembers that she turned it down is funny, because that's an extraordinarily well-selling book. Tim was this guy who I got on the phone with before anybody knew who he was. And I was thinking, oh, I'm doing this guy a favor. Well, Tim did me a favor by spreading the word about vagabonding to people who might not normally read a travel book. A lot of hardworking business type people who maybe really can appreciate the travel metaphors in vagabonding. And so it was fun to make it full circle, so that Tim is doing me a favor, that he's writing the foreword to the audiobook. He actually produced the audiobook too. That is not a traditional publisher. It's just Tim who put out the audiobook as part of his audiobook club. That was also used for the second edition print version of the book. And so it's been terrific, that really I owe a lot to him for championing the book and taking it to an audience that might not normally be in the travel section, but because it was in a business book, now that they're going to go to the travel section and check out my book. So I love it. One way that the 4-Hour Workweek sort of moved some of my philosophies forward in a way that I thought was revealing is it sort of helped spark the digital nomad movement, if you're familiar with that.
Yep.
That Vagabonding and the 4-Hour Workweek are sort of these key texts now in the digital nomad movement. And I didn't specifically, even though the digital nomad movement uses a lot of vagabonding ideas, I think it was Tim's assertion to sort of use that location independent philosophy, to use your time wealth to take your business on the road, that was interesting. And that even beyond Tim, I think digital nomads have deepened that strategy in ways that I find really interesting. And it's not just a philosophical thing. I think that technologically we now have Skype is so much more common, and social media is more common, and it's less strange to do your business from Rio or Cape Town or Vienna instead of Dallas or Dubuque. And so that's been fun to see, basically these philosophical ideas that Tim made a little bit more applied have really created this digital nomad movement that has been fun to see happen. Now, companies have realized that employees often are more dynamic if you give them the ability to be location independent. So it's been fun to see. Philosophically, I think they've pretty much stayed the same because independent travel has always had a pretty similar ethos. It's just a matter of moving outside of your comfort zone, going to new cultures, listening as much as talking, and really getting that education that you can't get at home in a university or in a seminar. That basically through your own vulnerability and even your own naivety and mistakes, that you're really enhancing your life and your skill set by traveling. And so I stand by those principles of independent travel, even though in the 17 years since the book came out, 17 and a half years, the act of independent travel is different because you can run a trip off your smartphone, which has advantages and disadvantages. You can in that digital nomad way, you can really stay connected in a way that wasn't possible when the book came out, and that has its advantages and disadvantages too. So philosophically, I've stayed true to independent travel, even as the specifics of independent travel continue to change. I think it hasn't. Resources that are available with the boom of the online world has actually made it easier to find real information as opposed to scary information. Clickbait wasn't even a word when the book came out, whereas now sort of news has always been about the man bites dog story. Dog bites man is not normal, but man bites dog is unusual. That's going to be the most interesting story. Well, now that's times 10. That basically everybody's fighting for our attention, and making us afraid is one great way to grab your attention. So odds are a lot of news you're getting from the rest of the world is either really scary stuff that's happening or how people don't like Americans, or sometimes it's the opposite. It's an Instagram picture that is obviously not real. Fortunately, if you can get past that clickbait or Instagram perfection layer of information about the rest of the world, you can get that neighborhood level information about a city, where maybe the headline in Paris is a really a big demonstration that seems a little bit violent. Well, you do some more research and you realize it's in one neighborhood that you weren't going to go to anyway. News will always give you an impression that the world is scarier than it is. Fortunately, online resources will allow you to not just research things, but maybe interact with people on the ground who can say, look, the real danger isn't terrorism, it's getting your pocket picked. Real danger isn't a truck bomb. It's going to be you drinking 5 beers and taking your rental motorcycle back to the hostel, after getting sunburned on the beach. There's a lot of common sense stuff that can make travel much more safe than we would ever assume. So I stand by the idea that the world is well, maybe not during COVID, but the world is a welcoming and safe place. I would say just Google as much as anything. Like, I don't follow any regular travel bloggers. I'll often just Google, a specific place where I'm going. A couple of years ago, it was, parts of central Sumatra and Indonesia. And then maybe sometimes I'll get some information from Nomadic Matt or, Adventurous Kate or different travel bloggers, but I don't have like one vertical that I go to again and again. In part because I'm a pretty salty traveler. I've been doing this for 25 years. And so, I get a guidebook or I don't, or I just get some basic information. But after all these years, I'm pretty confident that I'll figure things out when I get there. And that applies to any traveler because humans have always been adaptable. And that's why travel can be really cool. But I understand if people have less travel experience, they want to get more specific information. And so bloggers are great, but I say Google is a great tool because you might get, in the top 10 search results, 5 travel blog posts and 2 BBC articles and 1 Lonely Planet post. And it just diversifies your information stream, and you can sort of see when they're dated to and how recent that information is, which is also useful to know. Yeah, I think I talked about the pleasures of getting lost before I knew what the flaneur is. and I actually teach a class in Paris every summer. And I actually have my students embrace the concept, because Paris is the city where the flaneur was invented. You can do it anywhere. And it's just the concept of wandering through the city or the countryside with no particular goal, but experience. And that realizing that getting lost is not a bad thing, but can actually be an interesting thing that can enhance your day. And in this day and age, when we have a smartphone, they can tell us where we are and 5 options of where to eat and, 6 options of where to be entertained. The vulnerability of not really knowing where you're going is actually good cognitively. That, neuroscientists say that it's actually good for your brain to not know where you're going next. And that kind of situational problem solving that you find when you travel more than you find at home is good. So even in an age when it's easy to have lots of answers right there in your pocket, I encourage people to embrace getting lost, because sometimes the best serendipity, the best experiences can happen by not knowing exactly where you're going or what you're doing. French, and the Parisians in particular, are great. Even if they're not flaneuring, they are sort of doing it because it's such a walkable city. It's such a public city.
Sure.
And it's such a beautiful city. New York is another good example, because New York has just a lot of people in a very small space, and walking is actually more pleasurable oftentimes than taking a subway or a bus or a taxi to get around. A lot of cities have sprawl, and so maybe in Dallas or Seattle, it's tougher to do that. But so I would say, that an advantage, it's more cultural to the French. I think the French would be less inclined to be panicked about being lost. But I would encourage my American readership to embrace that, because getting lost can help you get found in a way that's completely surprising and oftentimes better than when you thought you were headed to begin with. I teach creative writing there, oftentimes travel writing. And the course at the American Academy is multidisciplinary. There's also poetry and fiction, but I have other teachers who teach those classes. What I've realized is that people love to study travel writing. So I've been offering some 1-week classes out there. And then I've also, directly because of Tim's influence, have been offering a big idea book boot camp. So that basically, if somebody wants to come in with a skill set for law or medicine or business, but don't have the skill set for writing, if they want to create their own 4-hour work week, given their expertise, then I have this boot camp that basically takes people with professional expertise in one thing and gives them tips on how to use that expertise in book form. That's a much newer class, but it's very popular. I did it back in 2019. I didn't do it in 2020 because COVID shut everything down, but I hope to do more of those in the future, because I think a lot of people, because of Tim and other influencers, really want to find new ways to reach an audience, and podcasts are a great way, but also books are a great platform for getting the word out. Well, the early influences are seen in Vagabonding, from Henry David Thoreau to Walt Whitman to Annie Dillard. And in recent years, as a travel writer, I keep an eye out for travel books. William Finnegan's surfing memoir, Barbarian Days, is a great travel book. It's about surfing, but it's also about travel. I loved it. Beryl Markham's book about East Africa is about flying airplanes in the 1930s, but it's also about travel and living other cultures. So those aren't necessarily applicable in sort of the 4-hour work week way, but they are examples of just extraordinary travel writing that I've gone back to. And then podcast wise, like everybody else, I probably listen to too many podcasts, including Tim's podcast and some podcasts that are about creativity or screenwriting, popular culture. So I'm trying to think, apart from Tim, I don't really listen to much like sort of lifestyle design podcasts apart from Tim's. Oftentimes my podcasts are more of a distraction. I'll listen to the Rewatchables by the Ringer Network, if you know the Ringer Network.
Oh yeah, I've heard of them. Yeah.
Yes, sports and pop culture stuff. So usually it's less education than just sort of edification and entertainment. Well, 10 years ago, exactly, I traveled around the world for 6 weeks with no luggage. And it underscored the idea that the less is better. You know, if I can
Right.
travel around the world with no luggage, then less is better. And so, you know, adapters are important, chargers are important. But at the end of the day, I think less is more, in part because it gives you less to distract you from what you're going to do. I mean, if you're a full-on digital nomad, if you need to do certain high-speed activities, or if you need to send big files, that's another consideration. But as far as just the pleasure of traveling the world, I'm a little bit, I don't know if anti-technology is the right word, but I gently encourage people to not worry about it as much. Face-to-face interaction has always been one of the gifts of travel. And sometimes the more technologically prepared you are, the less willing you are to leave your room and go out and smell something great and go to the restaurant where that smell is coming from, or hear
Right.
awesome music and go to the club where that music is coming from. It's funny. I was before when it was just considered a, you know, a Chinese or a Pan Asian problem, I was asked to write an article that encouraged people to travel.
Okay.
I actually I didn't publish it, and I'm glad. But my logic in that article is that paying attention and taking precaution has always been a part of vagabonding. Pandemic is an extraordinary danger. You know, sometimes there will be a war in a country or protests in a city. Well, now we have a global pandemic, and that's sort of muting the way that we all travel, and it's really affecting the way we all travel. And it's kind of scary right now. I suspect that we will be savvy about pandemic travel in a year or 5 years from now in a way that we aren't now. So in a way, I don't know that I would change the philosophy that much. And that's the advantage of writing a book that sort of hinges on philosophy rather than
hmm
bullet lists of practical information that might be outdated in 5 years.
hmm
So that same caution is going to apply because, you know, maybe going to Germany is a different animal than going to Spain right now, because, you know, it's more contained in Germany than it is in Spain at this moment. That might change in a month, but just getting that information that's specific to your place that applied 20 years ago also applies to the pandemic world. A sad thing is that the American passport, which used to earn us so much freedom and latitude, is sort of seen as a liability now, that a lot of countries see American travelers as maybe more likely to be infected than others, and Americans
Yeah.
have been a little bit sloppy about protocols for COVID. That's a sad thing to happen. That also falls under the category of just adjusting to circumstances as they happen. Philosophically, vagabonding is the same. We just need to be cognizant about how to travel in this new day and age. I don't encourage anybody to be reckless, but insofar as is possible, I know that people who are doing it and people who want to do it and will probably find ways to do it. I'd say that you can still dream about travel and find ways to make it happen. Yeah, definitely. I mean, walking is one. It's a different monster. I live in rural Kansas, and so you can walk for an hour and not see anybody.
Right.
It's pretty lightly populated out here, but walking is just a great way to experience any place, a place you know well. It's also it's just a different way of thinking too. I think walking, it frees you from the tasks that are in front of your face. It allows you to be a flaneur in a sense, even if you're not intending to be one. That without a task or a screen in front of you, then your mind wanders in a way it doesn't usually wander. And I've really enjoyed that even after the pandemic has happened. I've also done a lot of reading and a lot of writing, which is something I do anyway. But without these schedule driven duties, with less business opportunities in some senses because of the pandemic, I've been reading and writing in more open-ended and open-hearted ways. For example, I had a birthday on Tuesday. I did a podcast that was like an 8,000 word essay in audio form that I
Wow.
probably wouldn't have done had I not had all this time for the pandemic. And so I really just sort of pondered my own existence in the context of my birthday and the pandemic and some other factors. And that was fun. I probably wouldn't have done that without this.